Chapter 1 Prologue. Just outside number 4 Privet Drive, a tabby cat sat upon a wall. Her name was Minerva McGonagall, and she watched the far end of the street with determined intensity, her mouth set in an expression of firm displeasure. Rumor claimed the war was over. That he was gone, at long last. Elsewhere, the wizarding populace celebrated in the pubs or streets, through impromptu parties, incautiously risking exposure and seeming to no longer care about security. To Minerva, it all seemed terribly presumptuous. Instead of joining the celebrants, she came here, the most heavily protected place she knew, to await the inevitable arrival of the one person whose knowledge of the situation she could actually trust. While she kept her silent vigil and waited, she contemplated the residents of the house. A large man, Vernon Dursley, his skinny wife, Petunia Dursley, and their large infant son Dudley Dursley. The child screamed and punched his mother as she waved goodbye to her husband as he drove away to do whatever Muggles did during the day. The woman then spent most of the morning gossiping over the fence, sending the occasional suspicious glance in Minerva's direction as the day wore on without her leaving or chasing mice or whatever it was Muggles expected cats to do. This being the first time Minerva had occasion to come to Privet Drive, she hadn't realized the emergency safe house was already occupied. And by Muggles no less. Though she and Phileas helped develop the defenses here, Albus Dumbledore had been the one personally implementing them over the past year whenever he had a free moment. Minerva was not pleased with anything she saw of the Dursleys' lives. She couldn't imagine sharing house space with them, nor could she believe the defenses were intended to protect them. Dumbledore was clearly acting on a different set of information than she was privy to. It made her feel uneasy. She doubted any objections she might raise would mean anything at this point. Enough powerful magic had already been put in place, enough warding enchantments and heavy protection charms. She doubted that Mad Eye himself would be able to penetrate the defenses. It would take a truly remarkable effort to change the plan after it was so far along, whatever that plan ended up being. Hours passed, late morning slipping into early afternoon, then from there into evening, night drawing nearer. Vernon Dursley returned home, glared at Minerva and tried to shoo her away, but she merely watched him sternly until he gave up and went indoors. When the ancient wizard finally appeared, clicking his deluminator to darken the street, Minerva sat up straighter. Her tail flicked in irritated impatience. The whole day she had waited, and now he finally showed up with this casual attitude. He walked slowly, came at last to stand beside the wall where she waited. "Minerva, you look quite stiff. Do come down please." She jumped down to the ground, the cat melting and stretching, returning to her original form. The witch smoothed her rumpled emerald cloak, adjusted her square glasses. "How long have you been sitting there?" Albus asked, his tone casual. "Long enough," she said. Hesitated. "Is it true, Albus?" she asked quietly, unable to wait any longer. "What they're saying? Are James and Lily really?" Albus nodded sadly. "They are dead. I heard rumors, but I didn't want to believe it." "Oh, Albus." Grief overwhelmed her and she fell silent, composed herself. The more important part of what she had heard must be confirmed as well, or she could not dare to believe it. "Then, is you know who really gone?" Albus sighed. "It would seem so. For the moment, at least. Though it might have been better had he not." Minerva drew in a breath. "How could you say that? Better that he was still at large, still terrorizing and murdering." The older wizard held up a hand. "You know why the Potters had to go into hiding. You know who was targeting them," Minerva said, not quite confidently. "They had no choice, with young Harry to look after." She trailed off, feeling distinctly that she was missing something. "Not many know this, Minerva," Albus said, lowering his voice, "the true reason they were targeted by Voldemort. There is a prophecy." Minerva gasped. "Truly?" "Alas, yes. It is a confusing tangle, one I would not inflict upon another willingly, but I can tell you this. The prophecy foretold the one with the power to subdue the Dark Lord, born last year, as the 7th month dies. It didn't take long for her to put the piece into place." "Harry? So it's true, that you know who tried to kill Harry and failed? But it was because of a prophecy. The one with the power to subdue the Dark Lord. It is he, without a doubt." "Albus, but surely this is good news." He shook his head slowly. "Right now, the people want assurance of safety. Right now, they need a hero to celebrate. Not to fear." Minerva felt a cold shiver run through her. "Fear? Harry? But why? The full contents of the prophecy are known only by me, and so it shall remain. But there are two parts in particular that you should be aware of. The first part, that Harry will have the power to subdue the Dark Lord. And this, he will rival the greatest, with power of darkness and light. Darkness. Minerva whispered. But, Albus, what does this mean? Among other things, that we must take the greatest of care with what magic young Harry is exposed to. And, more importantly, most essentially, the world must believe that Harry and Voldemort are destined to be mortal foes. You're scaring me. Please tell me this isn't what it sounds like. Alas, Minerva, I cannot offer reassurances. We have been granted a reprieve from Voldemort's war, and for that we can be grateful. He will return, I have no doubt of that. The prophecy makes it clear, this is not his final defeat. What does that mean for us? For Harry? We will watch, be vigilant, and prepare for Voldemort's return. Harry will come here, with his relatives, where he will be safely away from any dark influences until it is time for him to come to Hogwarts under our protection. Minerva glanced disapprovingly toward the house behind them. You intend to place Harry here? She asked. I've been watching them all day, they are the worst sort of muggles, surely anyone else. No, Albus said simply. It must be here. But why? Voldemort will return, and it is vital that we keep him and Harry apart for as long as possible. Only here, protected by blood magic of the greatest strength, will he remain completely secure from any who might mean him harm. And perhaps, by growing up in a normal family away from his fame, he can be prevented from becoming arrogant and overly self-assured. I don't like this plan at all, Albus, Minerva said. I must object to allowing any wizard to be subjected to these people for his entire childhood. And Harry particularly. There are plenty within the Order who could take him in. Defenses nearly as impenetrable can be placed anywhere. Wouldn't it be better to have time to prepare him? No, Minerva, I am quite sure of this. This disaster was of my doing. I had hoped, well, had James and Lily survived, things may be different, but now the less contact Harry has with magic, the safer everyone will be. Hagrid will be bringing him along shortly, and then we must leave him. I know you've put a lot of effort into defending this place, but why? They are Harry's closest living relatives. His mother died to save him, and with that bond of blood and love he can be protected far more securely here than anywhere else. I have written a letter, explaining everything, so his relatives can inform him of his true nature when he is old enough. We must never return here after tonight, Minerva. Never draw attention to this place. It is a safe haven by virtue of its secrecy far more than by the protections that lie upon it, for Harry will not spend his entire childhood within its walls. And while I can do my utmost to protect him and his abode, there is no defense that cannot be broken. But, Albus. The old wizard held up his hand again. 10 years is not so long. We will see him again quite soon. For a child, it is much longer, Minerva said. Perhaps. But I have had a year and more to consider what must be done should my attempts to avert the prophecy fail, and this is truly the only way. Until Harry is old enough and strong enough to protect himself, and wise enough to resist the temptation of the dark, we must at all costs prevent Voldemort from finding him. I wish it could be different, Minerva, truly. Then I will trust you, she replied, as I always have. But in the quiet of her own thoughts, doubts could not be so easily silenced. The one with the power to subdue the Dark Lord. A vague sense of unease settled itself in the back of her mind. One she didn't quite dare to examine or put into words. Soon enough, thoughts of this evening and its mysteries would be driven away by the relentless march of routine, decades-worn habits easily usurping her attention. It would become little more than an idle curiosity in moments when Lily or James were brought to mind, for at Minerva's age time slipped by all too quickly indeed. The one with the power to rival the greatest. But the war was finally over. Now, for a while at least, things could return to normal. The wizarding world could recover from the staggering losses it had sustained, rebuild itself into a semblance of order once again. Minerva and Albus sat together in the quiet of the night, each lost in their own thoughts, awaiting the arrival of one who could be savior or destroyer. The one with the power of darkness and light. The orphan baby called Harry Potter. Chapter 2. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of No. 4 Privet Drive were never happy to find snakes in their house. Unfortunately for their peace of mind, it occurred with alarming regularity. The first time it happened was a few months after their horrid nephew Harry had appeared on their doorstep. The tiny boy sat in his corner, playing with his toes and muttering in baby talk, when a small green garden snake slipped out from under the baseboard and approached him. Harry's eyes went wide. While the baby part of him wanted to grab the snake and probably put it in his mouth, another part of him felt afraid. He stopped talking, hands frozen on his tiny toes, and watched the snake as it slithered closer. The snake raised its head from the ground, hissing quietly as it watched the boy. Harry whimpered and pulled his legs up in front of his chest, watching back. Petunia Dursley saw the snake and screamed. She grabbed a broom and, shrieking loudly the whole while, chased the snake out the back door and into the garden. She shivered, dusted her hands off, and glared at the boy. She knew it was his fault, it couldn't be anything else. Over the years, the Dursleys grew used to the invasion, though never pleased. Vernon tried to seal every potential inlet, caulking every seam, insulating every pipe, blocking every tiniest crack. Still they found their way in, slithering in whenever the door opened, coming through the garage drains. One even managed to slip down the chimney, though none of the Dursleys could imagine how a snake had climbed onto the roof. Petunia still screamed every time she caught a snake in the house, swatting them out the door or flinging them out the window. Vernon grumbled and complained, gave them a disgruntled kick and mainly ignored them despite his wife's protestations. Their son Dudley on the other hand rather enjoyed chasing them around, swinging them by their tails, and keeping them secretly in glass jars for as long as he could. Dudley knew his mother would shriek and throw them out into the garden the moment she discovered them. And he suspected that his worthless cousin Harry enjoyed ratting him out, as his snakes had an astonishing tendency of vanishing whenever Dudley left. One more reason to beat the slippery little snot. But he knew as a matter of course that new snakes would always find their way into the house, so if he wanted to play with one it would only require a little looking around. For Harry's own part, he had overcome his initial instincts for fear long ago and felt very sorry for the small creatures. He understood what it was like to be tormented and chased for no reason. The snakes did seem to like it in his cupboard, and since it was the one place in the house none of the Dursleys cared about, he was pleased to be able to provide a safe haven. He did not know how unusual this state of affairs truly was, having grown up with it. Dudley always chased him, Uncle Vernon always complained about him, Aunt Petunia always glared at him, and snakes always found their way into the house. That's just how life was. Harry made hiding spots for them, warned them in quiet whispers that they should stay out of sight when anyone else was around. They hissed quietly back and always seemed to follow his instructions, so he liked to imagine that they could understand him. He would call his snake friends out from their cracks and corners, stroke their smooth scaly backs, and whisper his troubles to them. When he was locked in his cupboard for being too loud or not finishing his chores quickly enough, or hiding because Dudley had caught him and hid him, they always listened attentively. Though he got the distinct impression that human affairs went well over their heads. Even if he wasn't allowed any real pets, wasn't allowed to play with other children, and his only acquaintance outside the house was the strange old Mrs. Fig, the gentle companionship of the ever-present reptiles provided him someone to talk to who would never hurt him. It was enough. It was on Dudley's birthday, a bit over a month before Harry would be turning 11, that he finally held a proper conversation with his scaly friends. Due to a string of fortuitous coincidences, Harry was permitted to accompany his relatives on Dudley's birthday trip to the zoo instead of being left in Mrs. Fig's cabbage-smelling house. Harry was even given a cheap lemon ice and managed several delicious bites before Dudley stole it away. Harry didn't protest, knowing that if he caused a scene it would only get him slapped or punished worse when they returned home. The chance to see the world outside the Dursleys' house and Dudley's school was too good to risk losing. Harry had never seen many animals beside the ever-present snakes and the occasional stray cat peering in the window at him. Even though he knew it would give Dudley an excuse to hit him, he couldn't hide his grin. It was a beautiful day, made all the more glorious by the fact that he was out somewhere new. Dodging his cousin was easier than usual, as even Dudley couldn't resist the multitude of distractions that presented themselves in every direction, far more diverting than a mundane game of Harry hunting. They toured about the different sections before finally coming to what Harry knew would be his favorite place, the reptile house. He had seen small garden snakes of every sort, but here they had massive foreign serpents in unbelievable variety. Dudley promptly found the largest snake in the place and strode up to its window. "You're a big fellow," he said to the snake behind the glass, his grin bordering on a smirk. "I could make a proper lasso with you. Wouldn't that be fun?" The snake, being fast asleep, did not reply. Dudley banged on the glass. "Wake up, you stupid thing!" he shouted. The snake woke. Harry could tell by the way its breathing changed just the slightest bit, but it didn't move. Dudley took advantage of his cousin's distraction to smack Harry upside the head. "Make it move." Harry tapped the glass half-heartedly. The snake opened one eye, watching him. Dudley smacked Harry again, then stormed off to find something more entertaining. "Your servant is quite uncouth, master," the snake hissed quietly. Harry blinked, a faint burning pain building in his forehead. He heard hisses, and understood words. "Are you talking to me?" he asked quietly. "Of course," the snake replied. "I had heard rumors that you were in the city, but it is often hard to believe street gossip." It stretched, bunched its muscles, relaxed into its casual drape over the rock. It extended its head, so it was facing Harry properly. "We have been waiting a long time for you to grow into your birthright, master." "Why do you call me master?" Harry asked. His headache at the effort of translation was starting to fade now, as though his mind had begun to adapt to the new method of communication. "Because it is the truth," the snake said. "We are small, short-lived, and quite impotent without the protection and guidance of a master. You Slytherin have been our rightful leaders since we were awakened generations ago. This we all know instinctively." The word Slytherin was almost direct transliteration, as Harry's mind couldn't quite grasp its actual meaning. It almost made him think status as heir, but there were at least two concepts missing from that translation that just didn't exist in his vocabulary. It made his head hurt to think about it, so he decided to mentally treat it as akin to a noble title among snakes and leave it at that. "You made it move, about time." Dudley shoved Harry roughly aside, sending the smaller boy sprawling to the ground. The snake hissed indignantly and raised its head to glare at Dudley. "Your servant is most impertinent," it hissed, somehow conveying disdain and threat. "May I be permitted to punish him?" "He's not my servant, he's my cousin," Harry said. "And I'll only get in trouble if you hurt or scare him, so better not to." The snake lowered itself to the rocks, slithering in a wave that Harry translated as a submissive shrug. "As you wish, master." "Hey, why'd you tell it to go back to sleep?" Dudley demanded, smacking the glass and turning on Harry. Harry, having forgotten to get to his feet, skittered backwards and scrambled to jump up. Unfortunately, Dudley was too close. His larger cousin wrapped his arms around him, picked him up off the ground, and pressed him against the glass. "Wake it back up," Dudley growled in Harry's ear. Harry sighed. "Could you wave your head around a bit? My cousin wants you to move and I don't really want to be beaten up this early in the day. If you don't mind, of course." The snake nodded, rearranged itself, swayed back and forth. "I do not understand your insistence on allowing this fool to command you, master," the snake hissed. "He is not even vicious." Another term he couldn't translate, this one more directly related to whatever power motion action concept Harry just didn't have. "I don't understand," he said. Dudley finally let him go, and he sat down hard with a sudden drop. Rage flashed through him. He normally suppressed such emotions, as lashing out was best done with words and angry words were rarely clever or biting enough, but just then he wanted Dudley to respect him for once. Perhaps the snake had gotten him worked up with all this master business, but something in him snapped. Something he didn't understand, the vicious part of him. Dudley leered down at the snake, his face pressed against glass that suddenly vanished. Off balance, the pudgy boy toppled into the cage face first, splashing into the water that filled the bottom of the tank. Harry couldn't help it, he laughed. It was a quiet, vindictive laugh, the laugh of one satisfied at justice being done, but also a somewhat frightened laugh of a normal boy whose world suddenly included talking snakes and, more unexpected still, glass that simply stopped existing for a few minutes before returning to its normal status. His aunt and uncle found them by Dudley's angry screams from within the cage. Though their quiet glares promised retribution, Harry couldn't bring himself to care. The look of terror on Dudley's face upon realizing he was trapped in a cage with the largest snake in the zoo was worth every moment of whatever punishment they decided upon. Equals. Following that incident, weeks passed without Harry being released from his cupboard for longer than the time it took for him to attend school and do his more unpleasant chores under the stern eye of Aunt Petunia. Once school ended, part-way through his punishment period, he was no longer allowed to leave the house at all. His meals were limited and the near-constant inactivity eroded what strength he had. He took ill and spent several days in acute discomfort which went completely untreated, earning him nothing but Dudley's constant scorn for his weakness. If he hadn't had the ever-changing array of snakes to talk to, he probably would have lost his mind. As it was, by the time Harry was finally allowed out of doors again he had lost much of his former speed and stamina. Dodging Dudley and his gang of thuggish friends became near impossible. The few times he managed it were always accompanied by inexplicable happenings, a hedge suddenly changing its location, Harry leaping clear over a 10-foot stone wall. Once he even found himself wedged securely in the chimney with no idea how he'd managed to climb in, but they couldn't find him and eventually gave up. He dropped to the ground, dusted himself off, and went walking in the yard on the opposite side of the house from the sound of their voices. He had something to consider, something puzzling and important. For several days now, he'd been hearing rumors about a master from visiting snakes, one in London and searching for him. At least that was the nearest translation he could discern. Communication was never quite precise between species. "Why does he want me?" he asked the small speckled snake who lived under the hedge. "No one can tell me." Master has not said his reasons," the snake hissed in reply. "He cannot find Master Harry, cannot visit the house, wants to meet you." Harry leaned closer. "He wants to meet me?" he asked quietly. He'd heard that the stranger wanted to find him, but never before mention of a meeting. "He waits at the park every night for 2 hours after sunset," the snake replied. "He has told us all to convey this message to you." Harry tapped a finger on his lips thoughtfully. "He was locked in his cupboard each night, to prevent the brat from destroying the house while we sleep, but he could probably figure out a way to slip the bolt from inside. It wasn't a very secure lock, but he'd never before had reason enough to risk punishment and discovery just to roam the house at night. The chance to meet another person who talked with snakes, though, that was an opportunity he could hardly ignore. The park was a good half-hour away from Privet Drive. 2 hours after sunset, his aunt and uncle might still be awake. He would have to be very quiet and very lucky if he was to evade notice. And he was sure he would only have one chance at it. Uncle Vernon would replace the simple slide bolt with something more secure once he realized Harry could escape his cupboard. "I would like to meet him," Harry said. "But I don't know how soon I will be able to get away. Send word to him that I will try my best to come see him." The snake hissed agreement. "It will be conveyed." "Thank you," Harry whispered. He heard the voices of his cousin's gang coming toward this side of the house, and quickly scurried away to hide. He didn't want to be caught by Dudley after one of his miraculous escapes had given him such a window of opportunity. Dudley always seemed furious at being cheated, whenever Harry escaped because of inexplicable happenings, in a different sort of way than when he simply failed to catch the faster and more agile boy. So Harry slipped away and hid, extra careful to make good his escape. For another afternoon, at least, he would be free of his cousin's cruel games.